This week, we welcome back host of the Last Debate podcast, Ravi Gupta.
So the question is, I'm obsessed with this question, not just theoretically, but for me personally. What is it that we can do as humans that is either AI proof, or, you and I are old enough that we are thinking in a few decades, not 100 years timeline. So what can we do that will be AI proof for 30, 40 years, right? That's what I'm thinking right now. I think this is urgent for people, and I won't say too much, but I'm definitely spending my year planning out this next phase and trying to AI proof myself. And it's and and I'm taking what will appear to people as a pretty dramatic set of actions, because I do think that it's going to be a dramatic shift.
This is Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you are welcome. You know the drill. Please subscribe, rate, comment, share, reach out, tell your friends, send smoke signals, whatever. We love your feedback and we want to hear from you. If you like our work and want to support us, the best way to do that is join Phetasy.com. You'll get access to behind-the-scenes content, outtakes, discounts on merch, and the ability to submit questions for some of our upcoming guests. Support your favorite scrappy little internet heroes at Phetasy.com. Walk-Ins Welcome is brought to you by Patriot Gold. Call 888-614-9238 for a free investor guide today. All right. I'm with Ravi Gupta, everybody, back on the podcast. Welcome to Walk-Ins Welcome. And Happy New Year.
Oh, do I say? Okay, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, come back. You never know. I never know when people have like their whole sponsored by, erectile dysfunction
I'll do that when you're not
medicine
here.
or whatever.
No, yeah. Sponsored
I
by
actually
Gold.
read my first erectile
feel like,
dysfunction ad the other day, so I feel like I've lost my podcasting virginity of sorts. So I need it. I had already done hair loss treatments, and if you could see, it's not exactly my problem, but
Yeah. How do you feel? It's so funny. Ad reads are a topic I feel like not enough podcasters talk about. They're very we just did one for Gold, which I was like, well, I guess I'm officially in the right wing media ecosystem. And I actually like precious metals. Like it's weird to me that they've become this kind of like right wing thing, because I actually have a lot of family members on all sides of the aisle who kind of buy silver or gold, and people who are like pro Bitcoin are like, if you're into Bitcoin, wait until you hear about precious metals and stuff like that. So it's funny, but the minute I was reading it, like this was an older ad, and I hadn't like really reviewed the copy, and we got to the end and it was like, go to www.trustbridget.com. And I was like, oh my God.
Trust Bridget. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I used to get more anxious about ad reads than the actual episodes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That would have been like 4 or 5 years ago. But now, I guess maybe I don't get anxious enough. Like I've read all kinds of ads this year. Hopefully my advertisers aren't listening to this, but there are certainly some of the products. I'm not going to give any free advertising on your show, but there are some of the products that, a lot of them, I would say, I was a big fan of before they sponsored us. I truly believe that. Now, the erectile dysfunction stuff and hair loss probably doesn't fit, but there are people in our audience who need that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
I'd hate to deprive them of that critical information and their discount codes, So
it's such a funny ecosystem, truly. I feel like you're also very similar to me in that you have multiple podcasts.
Yes,
people are always like, how many podcasts do you have?
I swear to God, a goal of mine this year is to cut down on the number of podcasts I like, the actual shows I do, but also the time I spend podcasting, because I spend a lot of time, but in a way I'm like, I feel very lucky, because I feel like I've gotten like a PhD of sorts in the world.
That's how I feel.
Get to talk to great people like you for a living. Just in the past week or two, I've talked to, Tim Alberta about his book on the evangelical church, or Bethany McLean, who broke the Enron story all about the healthcare system and what we got wrong about COVID. So it's like, Todd Rose over at Populous, I'm talking to tomorrow, experts on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So as long as that, I keep finding an excuse to do that kind of stuff. It's like, what do we have to complain about? It's like, oh
Yeah,
God,
no,
another
it's
podcast.
amazing.
It's great.
So which podcast do you have right now?
So there are sort of two categories of stuff I do. One is a strictly partisan podcast I do called Majority 54, which I do with the Midas Network. That's my biggest podcast. So that has like a few 100,000 people a week listen to that, but it's very partisan. And I would say your audience would probably hate that one. So you don't necessarily want to go over there.
You underestimate my audience though, because a lot of them listen to the Pod Save Bros, and I actually think my audience, even if they love when I have very liberal guests on, even if they completely disagree with them, because they just like to hear the different perspectives.
Yeah.
And sometimes they love like tearing them apart,
I'm sure.
in the subscriber community where they'll have big, long diatribes about how dumb they are. But I think they get that with, I also hear that from my extremely hardcore, if I have right-wing guests on, I actually think my audience likes to, which I feel good about. They generally like being challenged and are open to hearing all of the different perspectives, even if like they're
sure.
like, oh
yeah, and I think your audience definitely would be more in line with the other major podcasts I do, which is called the Lost Debate Show.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lost Debate is all about bringing people together with different perspectives. So we have a pretty equal mix of Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliated guests. And that one is, I would say, like more explicitly meant to have balance. And we've done a lot of deep dives. The most popular stuff we did this past year is I did a 4-part series on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And when we start, I have like pretty strong views about it. But what I said at the front end was, you should listen to this, and you won't know until the later episodes when I actually say what my opinion is. You won't know what my opinion is. And one of the things I'm really proud of is that even friends who, I think people would probably classify me as a little bit more sympathetic to the Israeli narrative, but a lot of my friends who are more pro-Palestinian really appreciated the episodes because I didn't hide any of what I viewed as the history. So, yeah. And so those are the two major shows I do. There's some other stuff I'm involved in. Like you mentioned, the Pod Save America guys. I'm doing a show with Crooked on the Indian elections that are coming up. I just spent a month in India for that, and I
love India.
It's a very interesting country. I'm half Indian. It was my first time ever in India, and
oh wow, where were you?
All over, because what we're doing is, and I can't say too much yet, but we're basically investigating a murder that happened in India as a way to talk about the upcoming national elections, and so and I'm going back in a couple of weeks for that. So those are the sort of three main sort of shows I'm involved in right now. There are a few others that I show up on every now and then, but those are sort of the big ones. But I would say for your audience, Lost Debate for sure. Like I think they really appreciate it, because we do things like, even though I come from Democratic politics, I worked for Obama, I spend a lot of time, I actually get the criticism I get the most is I'm too hard on Democrats, and maybe because it's my side, quote unquote. Yeah. Like I like nothing I have to say about Republicans is that interesting, because it's not said by a million other Democrats. But I think what I have to say about Democrats, and I believe those things strongly, to be clear, but what I have to say about Democrats, I think, is more interesting because I pay more of a personal cost for it, and I have more experience inside the tent to be able to say, like, this is how it is. Like, I think Joe Biden shouldn't run again. Like, these are the types of things that, that I think are more important for me to say, because more Democrats would pay attention when I have to say. Most hardcore MAGA Republicans don't give a shit what I say about, Donald Trump. It's not going to persuade them.
Yeah. Do you think anyone is persuadable?
I used to think no. And then after, I think, doing these shows, I really do believe my audience is persuadable, especially the Lost Debate audience. But even Majority 54, what's interesting, there's a lot of crossover where a lot of my audience from the partisan podcasts listens to Lost Debate now, including my co-host, who is a Democratic politician named Jason Kander. They now listen to the Lost Debate, and I'm pretty, like, I used to keep, what I said, 2 sets of books, But now I get a lot of comments from people who will go to the Lost Debate feed, and where I'll talk about things like, for instance, that I thought the indictment of Trump in Manhattan by the district attorney in Manhattan was politically motivated, for example. Which was a tough argument to make, because actually the DA was a candidate that I was his strategist. So I was both pissing off my audience and pissing off this guy who I had helped get elected. But people who came over to our feed and were listening to that really appreciated it, because they're like, you know what, it is a good point. And when you think about it, if the shoe were on the other foot, we wouldn't want like an Arkansas district attorney indicting Hillary Clinton after running for election on that platform. And then I think also what happened is, when I was later supportive of some of these other indictments of Trump, my Republican audience were willing to hear me out, because they at least felt I was fair on some of this other stuff. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of them who probably didn't appreciate my position, but there were more than I would have thought who appreciated it.
What do you think about the Colorado and Maine stuff?
You know, it's funny. I just did an episode on this yesterday, and it was a long, convoluted. You know, I'm a lawyer by trade, or have a legal education. I should be clear. I've never really practiced law, but one of my classmates in law school is like the foremost expert on this question. This guy named Will Bode, who's at the University of Chicago, and he's a conservative originalist. But before I put your audience to sleep on this, I'll just summarize it and say that my opinion is, legally, the states, I'm persuaded that states actually have the authority to make this determination. I'm not sure it's a good thing that they have that authority. Like, I'm not sure we want all the different states deciding, like each election official deciding who should be on the ballot, because we're just too partisan of a country for that to be a practical reality. And so that's why, like, I'm glad I'm not an originalist. So I actually do think that practical stuff should have some bearing on how we interpret the law. So my sense is, I do think that Trump engaged in an insurrection, at least according to the definition that Will Bode has laid out. He believes it too. And shout out to him, because he's a conservative who went to the Federalist Society to make that argument, which I'm sure it wasn't well received. But I just am not sure practically that this is a wise move for our country.
Right.
And it's good. And like, you know, the Republicans will turn around in your state of Texas, and they've already said it, they'll remove Biden from the ballot. And it doesn't matter that they have absolutely no basis whatsoever for that. Like, this is where we live now. We live in this sort of world where sort of norms and the rule of law don't really matter. And so I'm not sure. There's just so much other stuff on Trump legally that you'd imagine would stick, that I'm not sure this is necessary. And it's too close of a call. It's too incendiary, I think, to let it stand.
Yeah, he hasn't actually been convicted of anything, has he?
Right. Now, what Bode would say, and so what he will say is, well, what the Constitution says, and this is, stop me if this is too much law, but what he would say is that it's self-executing. And so what he means is, if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger and you're running for president, but you weren't born in this country, you don't need to have a criminal trial to say that Arnold Schwarzenegger is not, or even any trial, to say Arnold Schwarzenegger is ineligible. Every state official can make that determination. And they do quite often when it comes to eligibility for office. And so he says that the insurrection provision is just like every other eligibility provision, and state officials can make that determination. Now, I happen to think he's legally correct, but again, I'm not sure that's practically.
Because couldn't you make that argument for Biden being not all there? I mean, isn't that
now? There's not a law, unfortunately. Let me be clear, against people who are senile from running for office. Like, that's not in our Constitution.
But I mean, couldn't you argue it's not fit to be president?
Yeah,
in some respect.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a constitutional point. So Bode would say that it, like, would either have to happen under impeachment, which you'd imagine is, like, at least when you're talking about the Constitution, like, you know, being fit for office actually is something that somebody could consider when they're deciding to impeach a president. But again, like, I'm like definitely out on a limb here. I want to be clear. Yeah. I'm not sure, like, even as I defend the legal authority, I'm not sure I would want people to use it because I just, you know, as much as I don't want to see Donald Trump president again, I think we have to fight it out. Those of us who believe he shouldn't be president, we should either fight it out in the courts, like the actual courts where he's criminally liable, or I think more importantly with the American people, because in the end, that's this is how our country works, right? We're a democracy.
Yeah.
So
That's what I was thinking about too. It would be such a different thing if it was just him who wanted to run and everyone hated him.
Right.
He
Right.
had no support,
and then it wouldn't be relevant.
party.
Also, it wouldn't be relevant because who
Right.
cares, right? But I do think that, like, it's a precarious year. I think, like,
Yeah.
my Ricky Schlatt, who like she and I were talking about this before the break, and she's more of a conservative and more Biden skeptical than I am. Although, to be clear, I wouldn't say I'm in love with Biden. It's more of like a lesser of two evils type of thing for me right now. But we were both saying that even though we have different politics, that we think this is a year where there's a high degree of risk of political violence, even more than 2020. I firmly believe that. I do not see this American public handling both the lead up to this election and the aftermath really well.
How do you think that we as people in the positions we're in, having audiences and conversations, can perhaps persuade people to handle it better? Like, don't you think? Because I get mad because, and I have a bit that I've been working out that's tough, but I just wrote a piece about how America's too fat for another civil war, which will lead me to your other project.
I love that. Yeah.
Which will lead me to your other project that I'm interested in hearing about, your Squadra app, because I was going to sign up and then it felt really intimidating to me.
It's great.
Because I love that. We have a Sarah Connor fitness workout for ladies that I started during the pandemic. And it's just like, we were like, and we just kept going every day at noon. I work out with women who are in my subscriber community, and they've become like good friends and amazing, just humans. And it's just a way to show up and hold one another accountable. But I noticed when I was reading about your Squadra program that you said there was a lot of success with new parents, because my husband and I have been struggling.
Yes.
We both like really want to stay fit, but she was up all night last night. Like, she's just going through a sleep regression. We got probably 3 hours of sleep.
Well, I'll tell you right now, as a childless person, I'm staying in a house right now in Costa Rica with a bunch of parents, new parents, pretty much. And God bless you all. I don't know how. My mom raised me, my brother and sister by herself while working 2 jobs as a nurse.
Yeah.
She deserves like a Congressional Medal of Honor for that.
Yeah.
I don't know how the hell she did it. I mean, and it was the 80s. It's crazy. I think back, my mom was like smoking cigarettes in my face, and like, it's just like wild that she's a nurse.
Those were wild
times.
It's
just crazy. But so the background of what you're talking about is for 4 years, I've been running this informal group for my friends. Essentially, my theory was always that it's hard to, in isolation, stay healthy. So it's better if you create a team. I played a lot of team sports as a kid, and I'm much more motivated in a team environment than an individual environment. We've all had this experience. Like, if you go to a group workout class, you work out harder than if you go to this sort of Globo gym on your own and you just kind of do a couple bicep curls and walk on the treadmill and go home, right? So I created...
Yeah, and you have that instructor who will kind of push you past where you think your limits are.
Exactly.
I had when I was like in my 20s, I was taking karate because apparently I thought I was like a 7-year-old child again. But I had a great instructor, and he was always like, whenever you get to your limit, always do 2 more, whether it's 2 more breaths, 2 more reps, or 2 more, because it just trains you not to quit when you think you want to quit. And so it's like whatever you think your limit is, always just, and now I've kind of trained myself to do that, but it's not the same as when you're in a class and you have that group motivation. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, so had done it for a few years just as an informal thing on a spreadsheet, and essentially I had certain workouts that people would do, certain healthy habits that people would do, and you'd get points. It's almost like gamifying being healthy, but I would break everybody down into teams, and we'd have seasons. So people would compete as individuals and as teams to be the healthiest, right? And there would be inputs like the workouts and the healthy habits and things like that. And then there would be outputs, and everybody would do like these body scans a couple of times a year and people choose one of two things. Either they track their percent body fat or their muscle mass. Cause like some of my friends, God
Mm.
bless them, they're just skinny and their main problem is building muscle, was most of
Mhm.
us mere mortals are more concerned about losing fat. And I would say that's
Mhm.
90% of the people I know. And so, and then we've done this and we've seen tremendous results. And, I'm busy, as you could tell, as you are. Like, so I never really did anything with it beyond it being this informal thing. But I kept being asked, like, can I expand it? And I also wanted to invest more in it, like actually turn it into a members only site with all sorts of features where people could track biomarkers and
Do you
personal
have to
records.
pay for it?
Yes.
That was not something I was
Yeah,
clear.
people. Well, it was always free, but now that I'm building
Oh,
a
okay.
website and all that, it's $29 a month, uh,
Oh,
and people
okay.
can go to joinsquadra.com and check it out. And we're just beginning a season, so if people are interested, now's the time. You can go fill out an application, but we're also totally scholarship driven too. So whenever somebody emails me and I put this on the website and says, "Hey, it's like hard times. I just lost my job, or whatever," we comp anybody who wants to be comped. No questions asked. You don't
Mhm.
have to give a reason. You can just say, I can't afford it right now." And so, and then the other thing is at the end of the program, actually at any point in the program, but even at the end, even after going through the entire season, anybody could say this program sucks, and we give them a full refund. Um,
Mhm.
and it's been crazy. We've now seen a doubling of it just this year, and so, um, which is maybe why I shouldn't be telling people to sign up. But if you sign up on this podcast, you can go. You can go sign up. We'll approve you. But we're just now starting the season next week, and it's just exploded. Like honestly, it's like um, I'm almost the dog who caught the car, because now it's a real business that I'm that people
Yeah.
but it's fun. I like this stuff because I do think that there's certain things that people can do to be healthy, that you don't have to be like this nutcase Brian Johnson or whatever, who's like, like electrocuting his testicles and stuff. Like you don't have to do
Mm.
that kind of crazy stuff and like go to bed at 8 p.m. every night and never touch
Yeah.
alcohol. You can actually like there are infinitely better ways to grab the low hanging fruit, in my opinion, for fitness and have tremendous results. Like to people in our program, the most common thing I hear from people is, "I just turned 40. I'm in the best shape of my life." Like that was by far the most common comment I've gotten. And yes, it takes hard work. I don't want to pretend like everything's easy. Like people have to make good choices and work hard, but you don't have to spend, $100,000 to have Peter Attia as your doctor, or do the crazy stuff that Brian Johnson and those people are doing. Like there are basic things that you can do. And if you have a team behind you, you're more likely to stick to them.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that with my writing. I had like a it was really effective. It was actually like the most productive and structured I'd ever been, because I was being held accountable and had check-ins and would set goals and talk about my progress. And my friend Paul Shirley runs this. It was started in person and then he started doing it virtually, but now he's gone back to in person, called The Process. And he comes from sports.
Oh,
Like he was a
nice.
professional sports. So he kind of approaches everything with that athletic mentality of
Writing is the best use case for this. I'm in a group with you. You probably know him, Neil Strauss, the writer.
oh yeah.
Yeah, I do a
Yep.
seminar with him where it's kind of similar, where it's like 12 of us or something, and everybody kind of reports out every week their writing goals. And I finished my novel just a couple
Oh
weeks ago
nice.
after doing like
Amazing.
6 months of that program with him, because it really pushed me at the end to get it done. So
That's really
writing is
fantastic.
hard.
I
I think
should
writing is harder than working out.
Oh
It's harder than working out, I think.
yeah, it is. I mean, I'll do anything to. I'm like a master procrastinator when it comes to writing, and I will find really productive ways to
Yes.
procrastinate.
Yep.
So
Clean your
I'm
apartment. I was doing this
oh,
before I left on this trip. I had a deadline for writing, and my apartment was as clean as it's ever been. I'm like reorganizing my books, and color coding them. But you also find ways in
Organizing my
writing.
spices alphabetically.
Yeah, you also
My
find
husband will be like, "Oh, you must be on deadline because you're baking
Yes.
bread." I'm like, "Yep."
But there's also like writing ways to procrastinate, like revising and researching, and you find
Yeah,
every.
researching.
But that was like that's how I honestly think the change for me was when I was like, you have to write 1,000 words every day. That's it. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if they're the worst words in the world. No
Yep.
edit. You cannot edit. You cannot research until you get 1,000 words on paper. And once I adopted that approach, everything changed. And
Yep.
that was my biggest lesson learned. And every great writer says this, but you have to kind of go through it. Is you just have to be used to putting bad words on the paper. Like,
Yeah.
and you just have to do it. And sometimes
Yep.
they're going to be horrible. Every once in a while, they'll be better than you think. But you have to, in my opinion, you just have to make that progress. Because
Yeah.
if you don't commit to that kind of goal, then you're just tinkering and you'll never get it done.
Oh, I've been talking about writing a book for so long. It's like the biggest source of shame. But part of it is that I don't, I want to tell the story of really the accidental pundit. Because everyone's like, well, what do you want to write? But no one, the industry is like, no one wants to hear that story. But I feel like I'm pretty like a normie, even in the space, looking at everybody talking about the Harvard stuff. I'm like, you guys still sound like elites.
Yes.
Even if you're on the right wing ecosystem, all talking about Harvard, you all still sound like I don't relate to you at all.
It's just like the dumbest fight of all time. And I went to Ivy League school, and it's like these places are like it's like a masturbatory exercise of all these people who like think like this is the most important thing in the world, is like what like what the Harvard president's thesis or whatever says. It's like I have no love. I got in an argument about this 2 days ago with somebody who was because I think she should have resigned. Like if you ask me, I'm like whatever. Like you hold that now. I have a whole different question about plagiarism. Like, and I'm kind of with Malcolm Gladwell that like we don't acknowledge the sort of iterative nature of creativity generally, and like I don't think we have like a good gradation of what it means to build upon other people's work, especially in the way that the internet works, which is like we're constantly talking about the written word, whereas like in the world that you and I live in, which is like YouTube and things like that, what it means to quote unquote plagiarize is like really difficult to define. I say this as somebody who doesn't really go close to those lines, but I'm just kind of like sympathetic to people who mess around, but I'm not sympathetic to people like the Harvard president who breaks the rules that they enforce on their students. That I don't have any sympathy for that.
It's interesting too, because one of the arguments I kept hearing, and I do agree with as someone who's been in journalism now for all these years, is there's only a certain, when you're actually factually trying to express the definition of something, there aren't that many ways you can do it. I'm so sensitive to plagiarizing, and there's not that many ways to express certain facts or the definition of something when you're trying to say this is what's happening with the Supreme Court. You can't get creative with that. So that is I'm always like, oh, okay, I'm researching this and now I have to reframe it in a way that doesn't seem like I'm just lifting it, even though it's just getting information across.
Right. And, in the end, it's most of the things that we call plagiarism. And I think this is true of Ackman's wife. And I think it's true of Claudine Gay, is like sloppiness, like laziness. So it's like, oh, I have this passage. We've all been there. I can reword it. And it's like, it's no, in my opinion, no more ethical unless the wording itself is that beautiful. Often what people do is like, they're like, I'm going to reword it so I don't get myself in trouble. Now, why is that more ethical? Now, one is sloppy and stupid. It's one thing if you're like writing a fiction book and the prose is that important, but like Claudine Gay or Ackman's wife's like papers, who gives a shit? But I think like the case of the Stanford president and some of these other cases where the data, like there was some ethical problems with like the presentation of data and the way, that's a whole different story. But I don't care at all. Like, I don't know what these, I honestly, like, I don't care what
That's how I feel.
I don't care about these people's theses. I think most of higher education research is total bullshit. Like if you're
Well,
curing
isn't
cancer,
there like a whole replication crisis in social
yeah,
sciences
who's the
anyway, that
social
like
science?
none of this stuff is
Yeah,
even, aside from the fact that it's like, does any of this even matter? And I get it, like on the broader culture war landscape, I understand how it's holding people accountable to their own standards and the house that they built. And this is kind of like, well, you made this, and now you're living, the chickens are coming home to roost. But I don't, as someone who's still very working class, I'm not by any means like making, I know people like to think that I make seven figures. I don't. We have, financial insecurity. As someone who's in that position, I feel like that it's still so disconnected from things that I actually care about.
yeah. It's
Like I'm still just like, how the F is beef, ground beef, $6,
right.
$5.99? This is crazy to me.
Now it's divorced from it, and I have this theory. I'm not sure I fully believe it, but it's a working hypothesis, which is that polarization is good in many ways. There's a lot of aspects of it that are bad, but when I look at the Harvard fight, I actually sometimes think it is a good thing in the sense that I came out of the left. I was a former school principal. When I was a school principal, I was running a network of charter schools in the South. Our schools did incredibly well, but as I was in my last few years in that work, there was the rise of, you can call it DEI, you can call it CRT. It was manifesting as excuse making on behalf of people like Teach for America and these elite kind of liberal organizations that were coming in and saying that high academic expectations, standardized tests, academic rigor are racist.
Right.
And so when the fight over CRT happened, I'm coming from the left and I'm seeing a mixture of legitimate criticisms of DEI as I saw them, that were almost all coming from the right at that point, mixed in with some nonsense, like
Mhm.
pulling The Color Purple or whatever. I don't actually know if that was pulled, but like books, crazy like books that any kid should read, and this sort of pearl clutching Ben Shapiro right wing stuff where it's like they don't like sex and gays and all that kind of stuff, with like legitimate criticisms of ideas that are stupid and destructive. And
Right.
and so when the right and the left are fighting out this stuff through the Claudine Gay stuff and others, I don't necessarily love the people on either side of this debate, but the outcome sometimes is the rational one, which is
Mm.
a little bit of um, a settle down effect on this DEI stuff that is just, that to me needed a bit of a gut check, and that those of us
Yeah.
on the left weren't doing a good enough job of checking back. Like I've just spent a lot of time trying, but it's a lonely exercise. So it's only sometimes going to come from the ideological opposite. And by nature, that ideological opposite, just the way our politics worked, I wish it wasn't like this, are going to be excessive, and they're going to overstep, and you're going to get weirdos, and no offense to people in your audience who are members of these group like Moms for Liberty, who are like not the kind of people I would want to hang with, but there's like a tension that happens. Like, like I wouldn't want to be like hang with the members of the San Francisco School Board, but I wouldn't want to hang with Moms for Liberty either. It's somewhere in the middle. We come up with some sensible policy, we hope,
But that's what where I think most people land, and this is what I wanted to write, and I'm just going to write it because I think what happened to me happened to a lot of Americans. The sense of being like politically homeless, even though, and I've seen it accelerate, particularly after October 7th. I think there are a lot of Jews in America who feel very alienated from everywhere at the moment. And I joke like I'm also politically useless,
Right.
because what do you do with somebody like me? And a lot of people on the right will say, well, these people who are allegedly politically homeless will still vote for Biden. And a lot of people on the left will say you're just, going to vote for Trump, which I still think character matters. And
Yes.
I think a lot of people think that it's like some kind of shtick, like I'm confused. I'm like, no, I'm legitimately confused, but I don't actually think I'm alone in that. I think there are a lot of people who feel like all I care about is the cost of beef. You guys are having these like discussions about Harvard,
Right.
and I'm trying to just put food on the table for my family, and everyone's lost their mind.
Here's what I think people pick up on. And I say this as somebody who spent a lot of time working in politics. My first real job in this world, if you don't count like mowing lawns, delivering pizzas, and working at hardware stores, was for Obama, right? Like, and I actually don't think what I'm about to say is necessarily applicable to him, but there's a reason why he was exceptional. But I think what people are picking up on is that most politicians do not care about them. And I know this is the easiest thing in the world to say, but I truly mean it. Like, I think it, I don't think I have to do the work to describe that for Trump, but I think it's like, and maybe his superpower is that he's a little bit more honest about that than other people, even though he does this shtick that if they're coming after me, they're going to come after you type of thing. But like most of these people don't care about you.
Yeah.
Biden being one of them. Like, I think like, I will vote for Biden. But I won't vote for him because I think he cares about me. I think his very act of running for re-election is one of the most selfish acts I can imagine in politics.
Gold has soared past $2,000 an ounce, guys. Wars in Israel and Ukraine and rate cuts on the table are fueling gold's meteoric rise. There's a direct correlation to the national debt and price of gold. In 2020, the U.S. debt was $23 trillion and gold was $1,500 an ounce. In 2023, the debt is 33 trillion, numbers you cannot even get your mind around, and gold is over $2,000 an ounce. Donald Trump warned the U.S. dollar no longer being the world standard will be our greatest defeat in 200 years. Call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Mention Bridget Phetasy, and you'll always get best-in-class service from Patriots protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has a no-fee-for-life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no-fee-for-life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 888-614-9238 for a free investor guide today. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs top-rated gold IRA dealer 7 years in a row. Call 888-614-9238. Mention Bridget Phetasy. Who do you think should run?
Oh my God. That is always the harder question. Now,
because people say this on the left, but I'm like, okay, who? Gavin Newsom?
I'll give you an answer that is like my dream candidate, who I don't think could win a primary, but he's still a credible person, who's Jared Polis, who's the governor of Colorado. Now, here's a guy who is my brand of Democratic politics. He is a libertarian progressive. And what does that mean? Well, he was way more critical of the dogma on COVID lockdowns and all that, quicker to open the state up, has cut taxes like 4 times since he's been governor. He's also a free range parenting advocate. He wants to legalize all drugs. But he also connects that language of freedom to things like reproductive freedom. And so you start to put that all together and you're like, okay, that's actually a narrative that makes sense. And I like a politician who is going to try to spend money wisely and keep the government out of your business, and pick and choose when the government's going to do a really, really great job. I live in New York, where they just want the government to be involved in everything. And it's not because they care about the people, right? Like, a good example is casinos, right? Like, I love this example where it's like the progressive thing is to either ban or regulate casinos. So what have they done now? They've now said they're going to legalize a few casinos run by multinational corporations, essentially, in New York. Whereas New York's history, Chinatown and others, were like these mom and pop shops where like running a casino is like running any other business. Now, if gambling is immoral, why is it suddenly moral if you just put it in the hands of a big corporation, right? They're doing with this with marijuana legalization now, where they're handing out a few licenses, and now they're about to crack down on the illegal smoke shops. Like Eric Adams was bragging about this. They've banned Airbnb, even if it's your primary residence. Why? Because of the hotel trades union. These aren't progressive policies, right? This is just either they're going after people
cronyism
with e-scooters who are largely like immigrants delivering your Shake Shack
food,
right? Because they want to get the fee, right? And actually,
well, this is like going after Venmo,
right?
Like we're gonna tax the I'm like, you're going after the farmers market people and the hairdressers who had to survive during the pandemic.
It's a money grab.
Yeah,
and it's.
But did you see this independent contractor?
I saw you tweet about it.
This is nuts.
Tell me what's
and
going
I
on.
was
And this is
warning people
California,
about
right?
this because this is what pisses me off. Well, it was AB5 in California, which was the independent contractor thing, which was basically that you couldn't be an independent contractor. As a small business owner, I couldn't even hire independent contractors because I would have had to employ them. So they either want you to be employed because they're saying that these gig workers are being taken advantage
Bullshit.
of by these huge
By the way,
corporations.
it's the biggest bullshit
It
ever.
mostly affects women, by the
Yeah.
way, because it's women like me who are working gigs because we have kids or we're whatever. We're juggling like a million things, but 50% of gig workers are women. So I was reading about this last night. And it was a disaster in California. So much of a disaster that they had to walk back different parts and make carve out after carve out after carve out. You couldn't hire graphic designers. You couldn't hire anyone who was an independent contractor. They either wanted you on a gut. This is my feeling, is that they want you working for the government, working for a huge corporation, or working for a union.
Yeah.
Like it's a way to it's too decentralized.
Yeah, except
gig
unless you're a
workers and
cop-
small businesses.
Unless you're a police union, by the way.
So the Department
reason
of
we treat them
Labor,
differently.
this was not even legislated though, Ravi. It's bullshit. This was total bureaucracy. So the Department of Labor made a rule that's now going to affect independent contractors federally. And it's not even like, this is what drives me crazy. You don't even have to put this through like any kind of legal
Right.
process. It is bad. It's really, really bad. And this is my rage coming from the left. Like, how did they abandon the working class? How do I have people on the left who are telling me that I'm some kind of right-wing nutbag for pushing back against this?
Right. Well, this is why I think Colorado is a good example, right? This is how to be a progressive, in my opinion, the right way. Like, I don't even know if that's the word I want to use, but sensible, right? You just like what California is doing, and they've done this on so many issues, is just not sensible. And they tried to do this with Uber and they lost, in part because the Uber drivers themselves, if you look at any of the data, the Uber drivers liked the flexibility. They were against the change. Obviously there are exceptions. There could probably an Uber driver listening to this who feels differently, but the majority of Uber drivers wanted the flexibility. And it's one of the reasons why they failed to push back on that law. And now they're trying to do it through, extra democratic means. Yeah, I used to say that the best place to live, because I lived in Nashville for many years, the best place to live is in a blue city in a red state. But I'm not sure I believe that anymore with all the abortion restrictions and things like that, depending on who you are. Like,
that's how they're keeping all the libs out.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not sure I believe that
we
anymore.
don't want any more of your kind.
Yeah, I think I think the right wing has gotten too weird and way too comfortable restricting people's freedoms, and it's not just reproductive freedoms. So I'm not sure that's true anymore. But there are certain places like Colorado, which is just a moderate place by design. I would put New Hampshire there, North Carolina. Like, they're just places where Tennessee used to be like this. I wouldn't say this anymore. I think the city of Nashville is at war with the state and vice versa. But it's, we're running out of places to go. I like your city though. I like Austin. Last time I was there, I was looking at it.
It's a weird city. It's very weird. And I came here 20 years ago, and it was weird in a different way than it is now, because the tech influence it's like there's such a weird tech bro influence here now that like the conversations that I overhear, I was like,
a lot of crypto talk.
Which I don't mind actually. I just did a whole like Bit Curious. I hosted at this Bit Block Boom conference, and I know nothing about Bitcoin. And so I was just like, explain this to me like I'm 5, even though a 5-year-old would probably understand it better. So I was like, explain it to me like I'm a boomer. And I learned a lot, but particularly the most striking thing that occurred to me talking to people from all over the world was that in the United States, we view it as an asset, and in other places in the world, it is the more stable alternative. When your currency, we just aren't used to having a currency that's collapsing. And also hearing from women who in places like Iran could be journalists and get paid and walk out of their, country alive.
Right.
And you hold it kind of all in your mind. There was a lot of interesting stuff, but I'm always like, okay, and then the grid goes down, and then what? There's it's the digital aspect of it is for me very unsettling, but I learned a lot.
Yeah, and I think the tricky part about crypto is the culture. I think people get so caught up in
The
they
culture.
get caught up in the
Well, and I
culture.
think these were all Bitcoin
Yes,
maximalists.
yeah.
So I I get that a little bit more
It
than just like crypto in
it's
general.
funny actually. The reason why I was in Austin most recently, I think it was in September, is I was interviewing Ben McKenzie. If you know Ben
You
McKenzie,
have to let me know when you're in
yeah,
town.
I didn't realize you had moved there. I was interviewing Ben McKenzie, who is the guy from the OC, Ryan from the OC. He wrote a book about crypto, so I was actually there to
Yeah,
talk crypto, and he's very skeptical. And I'm actually interviewing, I forget this guy's name, but a Bloomberg reporter next week about crypto.
skeptical because the whole like the what are they, the EFTs or whatever?
He's a pretty like, so you talk about maximalists. He's like the opposite. He thinks crypto is a scam. I'm not fully there with him on the scam part of it. I do believe that it's been oversold in certain areas. I do think the use case that you just mentioned is a very interesting one, which is like if you need a stable place to put money. I think like what he was saying, and it's hard to argue with, is that the trend, like the use cases in most cases have been overblown. Like the idea that you can't walk in, even in Austin, because I tried when I was there, you can't walk into almost any store and use crypto, even till this day, all these years later, to purchase anything. And so,
Yeah.
but I like in the end, like this is something that it's always weird to comment on technology this early. It's still pretty early in the technology, and like,
And aren't there places like El Salvador where that's not true? You can.
well, he
There
wrote a whole
is
chapter on
more.
El Salvador, and I learned a lot talking to him about it.
I should interview
He
him.
went down. He's a cool guy. Like he's very smart about it. But obviously he's coming with a perspective. But he went to El Salvador as part of his reporting and basically said nobody's using it there, even though they gave people, which I thought was an interesting case. But like I don't have. I hate to have a solid opinion on anything this early in the technology. Like there are certain technologies where you just know it's going to be important. AI, for example, like
Right.
it's hard to argue. Anybody who's trying to dismiss the impact of AI like is delusional.
That's why the plagiarism debate seems so like ridiculous to me right now. I'm like, you guys are talking about plagiarism and like these kids aren't even going to be writing anything.
It's like the library
No.
book debate. Like when we're talking about what's banned in libraries, and be like, what kids are going into libraries to check out books? What world are you living in? But
This is like talking about the Dewey Decimal System.
Right. I agree. Like all of these cases, like the case of Ackman's wife and the case of Claudine Gay, those people are just having ChatGPT write that summary. There's no need to lift it from somebody else.
No.
And honestly,
and it won't be plagiarism. It'll just be
who cares
original.
if they did? Like in the end, like if ChatGPT is capable of lucid descriptions of certain factual matters and yada yada yada, we as humans have to find whatever is unique and helpful that we bring on top of that, and we should judge people's efforts based on those types of activities, whatever they are. Like if ChatGPT can write an excellent analysis of data, yada yada yada, then why do I need a human to recreate it and reword it? Like, let's find some other use for us humans,
I feel like I have such I want to interview more people who are in the art world, because there are people who are like training AI on people's art. Graphic designers are. I was reading this crazy statistic that there's like been a 50% drop off.
Well, I'll tell you my personal experience on this. I was about to hire a firm to do the logo and all the design for Squadra, the company I was talking about earlier, and they were going to charge me like, I don't know, I'm going to make something up $10,000. I don't know if that's.
It's very expensive.
And then I went on a website that you can use AI to create a logo. It cost me $200. Now I feel bad about that, but that is the responsible thing to do, and it was way better than the samples that they were giving me, and I had an unlimited amount of tinkering I could do. And so it's like it's like, and it's going to go all the way up the ladder. Like I have a friend who's a radiologist who was telling me that there was a study that just came out where the AI is better at detecting pancreatic cancer than radiologists. That job is definitely at risk. So the question is, I'm obsessed with this question, not just theoretically, but for me personally. What is it that we can do as humans that is either AI proof, or you and I are old enough that we are thinking in a few decades, not 100 years timeline. So what can we do that will be AI proof for 30, 40 years, right? That's what I'm thinking right now. And my
Have
theory
you
is
been
something with your hands.
following? Yeah, did something with your hands.
Yeah.
Have you been following? Well, that was that South Park. Did you see the South Park where they were? It was once again so
God
brilliant.
bless those guys.
But all the white collar workers were out in front of Home Depot, and all the trades guys were like rolling up in limos, and nobody could get anyone to come fix their stuff because no one had any actual practical skills,
Yes.
and no one was like a trade worker anymore, and they were all like these accountants and everything. They were like, "Get it, stop." They were all sitting in front of Home Depot trying to get work.
I think this is urgent for people, and I won't say too much, but I'm definitely spending my year planning out this next phase and trying to AI proof myself. And I'm taking what will appear to people as a pretty dramatic set of actions because I do think that it's going to be a dramatic shift. Like,
what are you doing?
Well, I can't say, but
oh, come on!
But
I'll
tease it this way, which is I am, like, I'm learning.
Like, I'm going to trade.
I'm learning a new set of skills.
Yeah,
that will take me a decent amount of time, and that will appear like a very dramatic move, and I feel very strongly about it, and people will think I'm crazy.
I like it.
Yeah, but it's fun.
Yeah,
I love learning new things. By the way,
I do too.
Over here. Yeah. But yeah, I love learning new things anyway. I actually think it's like the equivalent of like Mike Rowe or whatever, the dirty jobs guy or whatever, is like I have my own version of that story. It's not necessarily a dirty job, but like hard stuff that you could imagine will be helpful to people no matter what. That's kind of what I'm thinking. You know, I've been trying to take my audience on the ride, make them think about this too. Is like you have to really think about how easy your job is to replace. And if it's easy to replace, you either need to be the one replacing it. So the entrepreneur who creates that new app or AI tool or whatever, or you need to be in a different field.
Have you been following the CES updates and stuff from the like conference?
No,
oh, God.
I've been to CES once, but
the tech this year is banana. I'm like obsessed with this stuff because it does finally feel like we're living in that future that we saw in the movies. Right. It's just some of the stuff coming out is really unbelievable. And a lot of it is AI driven. These little like AI bots you can carry around and will do tasks for you. And it is like, how do you maximize this for the human potential?
Yeah.
Not like, oh, we're being replaced by robots, which we might be, hence the Sarah Connor workouts. But it's weird having a kid. I never had to really think about any of this.
Right.
I always joke, I'm like, when I was childless, I was like, good luck, fuckers. You're on. Like, right. I don't need to care. I'm out of here.
Even if you didn't have a kid, this change is coming right now. And it's going to come for people's jobs. Like you talked about graphic designers. I talked about radiologists. It's going to keep moving.
I try and imagine, I like joke that I don't know whether I should be teaching my daughter how to grow food or teaching her, how to like build technology or go live on Mars or both. It seems like it could go. Have you been following the farmers in Germany protesting? No. It is nuts. And again, it's always framed as like these right-wing lunatics. But if you actually look at the reporting over from independent journalists in Germany, it's like people are on board supporting the farmers because it's kind of the same thing that happened with the Dutch farmers.
What are they asking for? Because
it's all of the like top-down government regulations that they're putting on these farmers. Essentially, it's kind of a land grab. They're trying to essentially say for environmentalism, you can't use certain like fertilizers, and I don't know. It's a whole rabbit hole if you want to go down it. It's really interesting though. And again, it drives me crazy that the left wing is not more on board because this is such a working class group of people.
There was a farmers controversy in India, where it was a couple years ago, where
Well, in Sri Lanka
the
too.
Modi government wanted to institute reforms to agricultural practice. And essentially what was happening was like there was like a cartel of all the bigger farmers who essentially controlled the sort of flow of crops up, and then there was a way that people were selling them and all that. And Modi wanted to reform that, so to basically loosen up the system. And I have a lot of criticisms of Modi, but what he was essentially doing was the progressive policy. And then the farmers were protesting. Now, Americans were looking at this, especially liberal Americans, and they saw farmer protests, and they didn't ask themselves which farmers are protesting. The farmers who were protesting were the landowning farmers who controlled the system and benefited from it. The people who actually, the vast majority of the farmers on the ground who were like the rank and file farmers supported the change because the poor farmers now could benefit from an equal system. But you saw one
Mm.
actor and actress and Hollywood person after another saying, I stand with the farmers against Modi's reforms. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. First of all, you don't know anything, like nothing
Right.
about any of this. It's like crazy to me that this is even on your radar. But two is you're progressive. You don't even ask yourself at all who these farmers are and what this reform is, right? The reform actually is actually helping the average farmer. But it's just crazy. It's just like a good example. It's like, what do you do with these people? You know? It's like it reminds me of the
It's
Israel-Palestine stuff, how quick
yeah.
people were to seize on that issue who had no, I used to work at the UN and I worked on Israel-Palestine issues. And it's like it took me a while to even wrap my head around the latest there, but I had friends with blazing speed putting out rather pointed stuff on the internet, and being self-proclaimed, activists and yada 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 on this kind of stuff. Well, it's just I'm so curious as to where this comes from. Like, I can get angry about it, but like, what is it about these types of issues that attract people, while at the same time they ignore a lot of the local issues around them?
Yeah, the farmer thing like is interesting because I saw it's something that was crippling to Sri Lanka, which I've lived there and loved it, and
I was
talking
just
to my
there.
friends there.
Yeah.
It's my favorite country.
I was in Aragon Bay surfing. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. I was in Hikkaduwa.
Oh yeah, also a good
It
surf
was
area.
for like 3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was every morning I wake up, I'm like, why am I not in Sri Lanka? And since 10 years ago, it's been rough. And my friends there talk about a lot of the stuff that's going on, and Sri Lanka's got its own long history of politics and so much corruption and
Civil War.
then Civil War. And then I don't know, I've been trying to like wrap my mind around what is it called? I'm totally blanking because I have had 3 hours of sleep. I don't know how much you've like gone down this rabbit hole either. The NACs, the natural asset companies. This stuff, I don't know how no one talks about this
What is
stuff. It's they created a new asset class. Do you know Whitney Webb? She's a journalist. She can seem really fringe, but she's brilliant and usually like years ahead of the curve on stuff.
I don't know her.
Like this. She's been sounding the alarm on this forever. It's like a new asset class, essentially over nature. And the deadline's been extended to January 18th. And people are kind of like, again, it's under this guise of environmentalism, but it is a very strange, unsettling land grab and it's like very abnormal for the New York Stock Exchange to be able to create this new category and trade on it. And I hear no one talking about this.
Well, I had a good, and you would love Bethany McLean if you've never interviewed her before. She's the one who wrote The Smartest Guys in the Room or whatever about Enron and broke that story back in the day.
Oh, yeah. I should have
She
her
wrote
on.
a really good book about the pandemic. That's what I interviewed her on recently. But she and I were talking about how the only religion left in this world is capitalism. And I'm somebody who, generally speaking, would call myself a capitalist, not because I love capitalism, but the famous saying, it's I forget what the exact wording is, but it's better than alternatives, but or it's like it's this the I'm butchering it. Maybe I didn't sleep enough either, but it's basically like capitalism is the only thing we've got, right? And
Right.
especially in a world where people don't believe in religion in the numbers that we have now, and I being one of them who was raised Catholic and stopped believing, and we don't have civic norms and beliefs, and we're more skeptical of institutions than we ever have before. People will, if you can legally get away with something and make money, people are going to do it.
This is weird though. This isn't really like this really only benefits like oligarchs, I guess. And I think cronyism and capitalism get very confused all the time when people talk about this.
Yeah.
Because capitalism actually has pulled so many people up out of
Yes.
poverty. Have you ever heard of like the 12 billionth person will never be born? And it's this idea that every society, as they pull themselves up out of poverty,
Have fewer
essentially,
kids.
they stop
Yeah.
having kids.
Yeah.
And so this idea that we're going to like overpopulate the earth isn't true if we continue to pull people up out of poverty. But in the Whitney Webb article about this natural asset stuff, I'll send it to you when we're done. Last month, the New York Stock Exchange announced it had developed this was in 2021, she wrote this, and people are allowed to comment on the SEC website up until January 18th. They were trying to close it January 2nd, but it was over the holidays and people were like, this is bullshit. You're just trying to like slide this under the rug while everyone's not paying attention. And so they pushed back and then they pushed the date back. Last month, the New York Stock Exchange announced that it developed a new asset class and accompanying listing vehicle meant to, quote, preserve and restore the natural assets that ultimately underpin the ability for there to be life on Earth, end quote. Called a Natural Asset Company, or NAC, the vehicle will allow for the formation of specialized corporations, quote, that hold the rights to the ecosystem services produced on a given chunk of land, services like carbon sequestration or clean water. These NACs will then maintain, manage, and grow the natural assets they commodify with the end goal of maximizing the aspects of that natural asset that are deemed by the company to be profitable. It is banana town.
So this is like, as I'm reading it, obviously I'm reacting to only what you told me. So my sense is they must be trying to create a classification like the B Corp, if you know what the B Corp is. Like the B Corp is called a benefit corporation, and it means, because like a traditional company, you only can take into account the profit maximizing for the shareholders. So they came along with the B Corp to say, well, okay, this is a type of company where you could also take into account the public good. If I'm hearing that correctly, this is a weirdly structured, and I could be wrong about this, a strangely structured and worded way of saying, okay, we're allowing you to create corporations whose goal is the ecosystem's health. Is that, I could be wrong about that. But it's funny, like I haven't heard a lot about that, anything about that. So it's wild. That does seem like a major development.
Well, it just seems like even someone like yourself, I would like to hear both sides of it, because I've seen people on the left be like, maybe this is a way to sustain life on Earth and blah, blah, blah. And I've seen other people saying this is very unsettling and essentially like very strange land grab from a lot of it. Which sounds like a conspiracy, and I pushed back. Somebody was like, what do you think about what you said on Dumpster Fire 41 back in when you were like, I was like, not everything is this crazy conspiracy that's Agenda 2030, but now I'm like, okay, maybe.
But you're still right.
Maybe I was wrong.
You're still right about the not everything. Like, just because you say not everything's a conspiracy doesn't mean there aren't conspiracies, right? Like, my standard for what makes a conspiracy is evidence. And you show me that evidence. This is like, the argument I've been having with people about January 6th. Like, these people like Breaking Points or whatever, they run these segments and they're like, January 6th was an inside job. And the evidence that they put forth is garbage. So I'm like, look, it's not that I don't believe the government's capable of a conspiracy. I just think that often the simplest explanation is the right one, unless you give me evidence. So the simplest explanation on January 6th was that the president had said for a long time that the election was going to be stolen, and then after the election happened, he said it was stolen. He roused up his supporters and made them believe that it was stolen, and they acted in a way that you would imagine people would act if they thought an election was stolen from them. And had and there's all this language around unindicted co-conspirators, FBI, by a bunch of people who I think aren't clear on what those terms mean. And in the end,
But wasn't there that like Governor Whitmer? Weren't there all those like feds implanted in the whole Whitmer?
Yeah, but that's
Whitmer's?
different. Yeah, that was
Okay.
different, and even that we did a whole thing on that too. In the end, the best people could say about that was that they walked up to the line on entrapment, and the courts actually parsed through that. Some of the defendants there were acquitted on some of the charges, and some of them were convicted. And what wound up happening is these guys were starting to go along a certain path to do something really bad to her. The FBI had infiltrated this group. And the big debate is, did they entrap those people or not? But that had nothing to do with January 6th. And so, and there's no.
But but my point is only I can see why people would say, well, we see feds over here. Right. What kind of inciting or encouraging or entrapping these people? Why wouldn't it happen?
But I'm old fashioned. I want my feds getting in the middle of people who are planning to murder a governor. So it's like, to me, and people should look at the evidence on that one. Well before the feds got involved, these people were planning terrible stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's like, this is what the feds should be doing. Now the question is, there are laws and they have to, and I love this country because in the end, those people were entitled to a trial, and there was a fair airing of what happened. And like in certain cases, the FBI screwed up, and in certain cases they did the right thing. And I would want my FBI trying. But in the case of January 6th, it was a spontaneous thing. Like, people can say, well, the FBI was capable of X, so they should do Y. But I'm like, show me why. But they also don't I think maligning the FBI is also dangerous, right? Like, you're a parent. There's a lot of parents listening to this. I implore anybody to go to the FBI press release site right now. I haven't even looked at it today. What you'll see is FBI foils sex trafficking ring. FBI catches child molester in interstate interstate, cooperation between the Arkansas Attorney General and you'll read one thing after another, the FBI doing things that you want them to do,
This is how I feel about maligning journalists too. I think that there's this kind of meme of however much you hate journalists, you don't hate them enough. But I found this enormous thread of what local news journalists had done over the past year, and it was incredible.
Right.
Just some of the story, and it was all corruption, government stuff, the way journalists are supposed to function.
Yeah, look at the Ukraine, or even the Israel stuff.
Weirdly, though, Israel has made a lot of people that I've talked to. The Israel thing is crazy because so many people have become 9/11 truthers because it's banana. Yeah. That to me is my husband just thinks everyone's too loose-lipped and incompetent to pull off these things that these people
this is the funny thing about Biden that I think is funny to me is we're supposed to alternatively believe that he's senile and slow and all that, which honestly, I'm closer to that than what they also want us to believe is that he's some kind of sinister mastermind. The government, I'm of the camp that the government is largely way more incompetent than we think they are. Now, that doesn't mean they're not capable of bad things. And I do believe in holding them accountable. And I do believe in things like whistleblower protections and due process of law. And as much as I think that the people in Michigan were totally reprehensible, I'm glad that they had their day in court. And this is true of Trump, right? And I just said that before. And I thought that the Manhattan DA indictment of him was bad, yada, yada, yada. But all this is to say, we should all want our government to be more competent. And this is what I guess to the FBI. And you talk about the journalists, right? And the journalists are a good example. There's a lot of them, Taylor Lorenz and these people, they don't make it easy, right? They do stupid things.
It's the mainstream, the Twitter kind of high profile branded journalists, I feel do a lot of harm. But
yes.
people toiling with no name, the guy in the Russian prison,
Yes.
the
Navalny. And I love Navalny. I mean, you could talk about Navalny forever, but
and also the journalist. There was a Washington Post journalist,
yes,
or
Wall Street Journal,
Washington Street Journal
Evan.
journalist who's in jail there. Yeah, Evan.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Mississippi. I used to run a school there. I started the state's first charter school. The journalists on the ground there are on a daily basis holding accountable an incredibly corrupt power structure. Full stop. And I say this as somebody who benefited from that power structure. I changed the law so that we could start a school there. I enjoyed the support of everybody from the governor on down. But these are the very same people, almost to a person, who looted the state's welfare system so that they could build Brett Favre's daughter a volleyball court. And it was because of journalists at Mississippi Today, a nonprofit news publication, that broke that story. And they broke it. And it's the kind of story that I think anybody, no matter what your politics, should be appalled by, which is the poorest state in the country. They're taking money out of the mouths of poor people for nonsense. And that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, let's start our politics there, and this was also at the same time that they refused Medicaid expansion, which one can have a view about the role of government. And as I've stipulated too, I'm a fairly small government liberal, but I do think that every child should have healthcare. That's like a basic belief. And even if you don't believe that, the idea that you could refuse Medicare expansion dollars from the federal government while also looting the welfare of those children and those families, to me, is that's what reporters are here for. And I'm glad they did that. We don't celebrate that. We talk about the childish stuff that happens at the New York Times and among these elite journalists at times. But even, by the way, at the same publications, there'll be amazing journalists, right?
There's great reporting.
I interviewed New York Times reporters who, I think Brian Rosencrantz is his name, that talked about how expensive the New York City public works and the subway is. And they did this multi-part series where they traveled around the world and were like, well, how come in France it costs this and it costs this much in here? And I was an hour deep into this conversation with this New York Times journalist who is the people in New York said that there's this machine that needs 3 people on it, but I went to France and they only have 1. And I'm like, this is journalism. And it's tons of money at play. He's calling bullshit on public officials, wasting taxpayer dollars. I mean, it's just and those people exist alongside Taylor Lorenz and alongside these people who do have a political agenda and are biased and are elite. There are these people who are working really hard, and that's true of the FBI too. It's for every person who steps over the line, there are 100 FBI agents who are keeping us safe, and we need to somehow hold that one person accountable while celebrating the work of the other 100.
You sound like a Fed. No,
yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Look, I'm more likely to be, the Feds are more likely to be knocking on my door than I am likely to be joining them. But it's just that, I don't know, I grew up, maybe it's because I grew up around the mafia, and they took down the mafia, and it was when Giuliani was in a much different mental state. They really cleaned up. I grew up in Staten Island. And they cleaned up what was a very corrupt sort of power system around us. You couldn't build a house, you couldn't operate a business without them shaking you down, and that changed pretty dramatically within a few years.
Sometime in the early 80s, REO Speedwagon's airplane made an unannounced, middle-of-the-night landing.
This is my friend Kyle MacLachlan, the star of Twin Peaks. And he's telling me about how he discovered a real-life Twin Peaks in rural North Carolina, not far from where he filmed Blue Velvet.
What was on the plane was copious amounts of drugs coming in from South America. Supposedly, Pablo Escobar went looking for other spots, quiet, out-of-the-way places to bring in his cocaine.
My name is Joshua Davis, and I'm an investigative reporter. Kyle and I talk all the time about the strange things we come across, but nothing was quite as strange as what we found in Varnamtown, North Carolina.
There's crooked cops, brother against brother. Everyone's got a story to tell, but does the truth even exist? Welcome to Varnamtown.
Varnamtown is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
to go back to the question we never answered because we have the best conversations. What can we do? Because I over time, and I've received shitloads of pushback about my political, homeless, wishy-washy, whatever. And I have a lot of, I would say, subscribers and followers who somehow still listen to me, even though they've pushed back and said they too think polarization is ultimately a pretty good thing and are pro polarization, which I think it's important. That's the point of this country, is to be able to have the.
I just wish it were more good faith. And to
Yeah.
reiterate what I said on the polarization, I'm not sure I fully believe it, but there are times when it's helpful. Now, it would be way more helpful if Chris Rufo and the Defenders of DEI were both operating in good faith. I don't think either of those things are true. So I think, like, in a world where the two people are coming together and they're actually like, hey, like, I genuinely believe these things, and I'm gonna like actually try to be persuaded, and I'm only going to marshal evidence that I think is high quality, and I'm not going to manipulate people into like, if you can answer all those things in that world, and I'm like, definitely, then the polarization and the dialectic is worth it. I'm not sure we're there today, though.
But it's such a game. It's so weird because I had Rufo on the podcast and I expected him to be the avatar that he is online, and it was a completely different person.
Yeah.
He was much more nuanced and thoughtful and compassionate and empathetic than the person that he presents in order to fight these battles. And I also understand that in the culture war, it is a war, and you have these, there are power structures that I do think ultimately we spend a lot of time going, but the right in this country, and the left has all the institutional power. I see things like what they did with the independent contractors, and it makes my blood boil. And that's just a bureaucratic grab. It's not even something that we have to do legally. So there's like, as much as the right is terrifying and also just like very strange lately, and I don't feel like I identify with like the body count discussion and all that. I'm like, you guys fucking lost the plot. What are you even talking about?
I do think because of our uniquely federalist system, depending on where you live, I find this true of my audience. Depending on where they live, like I think of this family I know in South Dakota that listens to our podcasts. They're obsessed with the right, and they're always telling me that I'm too obsessed with the left. And I think in their world, that's right. Like, they don't have a threat from the left. They live in, Sioux Falls or whatever. I always get my Sioux City, Sioux Falls, whatever, South Dakota. In New York, the left is very powerful. But the problem is, like, the two overlap in certain very serious ways that I think is why people feel politically homeless. Now, like, a good example is if you're a corporation, you're a very powerful billionaire corporation, et cetera. And I don't mean corporation like the people listening here, like the corporation you set up to run your restaurant, right? I mean like huge corporations, right?
Like BlackRock.
Yeah, those people get whatever they want. And traditionally, if I'm assigning blame, I tilt it slightly. It's always traditionally been true that I would say the right is slightly more to blame for that because they, have created a favorable tax environment for those people, or whatever. But people like my home state senator, Chuck Schumer, have been just as guilty of creating a very favorable environment for those people as anybody else. So it's not neat and clean, right? And this gets back to nobody gives a shit about you.
Because they don't.
Yeah. So it's like, I say that to say, I don't want people to be nihilists because that's what they want. The people in power want you to be nihilists. But I also don't blame people for the instinct, right? Like my goal is to try to pull people out of nihilism and continue to get them to engage while also validating their just lack of any sense of hope. So it's like I
think we have similar goals.
But I still vote, and I still get involved.
Yeah, I do too.
And I also think like I use language will be like, look, like I have all these problems with Biden, for example, and I'm going to vote for him. And I can talk more about it, probably a whole other hour as to why I believe that. But but I will do that. But I will also mix my votes. Like, in New York, for example, if I have the opportunity to vote for an independent or a non-MAGA Republican, I will. By the way, my own father is a MAGA Republican who ran in New York State. I did not vote for him, but he ran for New York State Senate. But yeah, I don't know. Like, where I grew up in Staten Island is a good example of this. They're a classic Obama to Trump area, and I think it's interesting because people like to make fun of Staten Island and they talk about them as bigots and yada yada yada. And look, there are definitely bigots on Staten Island as there are anywhere else. But I think what they didn't really account for is that the people of Staten Island had been the literal garbage dump for the city for 50 years. It's where they sent trash, and the city ignored them. They looked down upon them. They barely tolerated them. And they also had a comically out of touch politics that the people of Staten Island looked at and said, this is bullshit. And a good example is 2020 around the sort of so-called racial justice protests where cops in New York City were treated like they were, ISIS, and I think like my neighbors were like, who are cops, firefighters, et cetera, some of whom lost their colleagues in 9/11. There's no place lost more people on 9/11 than that. Looked around and I'm like, we're public servants and we're being told by people who live in, Tribeca, who are, running into an Abercrombie for so-called racial justice protest that we're the bad guys. And I'm like, come on, like, look, and I had my fair share of dust ups with like corrupt and aggressive police officers, and they need to be held accountable. But I think we went so damn far in a certain direction that a lot of people looked around, and if you don't give them a sensible alternative, they'll run to a nonsensical alternative. And I think that's what I've seen from a lot of my friends on the island. And my hope is to bring them back a little, because I think where they've run to is not productive. But I want to pull them back to a place that is. But the problem is there need to be politicians who are sensible. And right now it's hard to find those people because everybody's playing a game.
Yeah, but how do you even break through if you're sensible?
Well, this gets to a deeper problem, because I started this group called Arena, which is the largest training operation for Democratic staffers and candidates in the country. And I still sit on the board of it. I ran it for all 4 years of the Trump administration. So I spent a lot of time with candidates. And I can tell you this, it is miserable to run for office. And it attracts a certain kind of person who is a broken person. Now, and look, everybody,
it's like comedy.
Everybody's broken in a certain way. I forget who said, I was reading this article about a screenwriter yesterday where he said, even my demons are bored. And I very much I can definitely, that jives with me, which is I definitely have my demons, but even they're kind of over the sort of narrative now. And I've kind of just made peace with them. But the people who run for office are either mega narcissists or broken people who are looking to make up for something that happened in their life. Very rare is the person who genuinely wants to help people, and that's their main. Nobody is purely just wants to help people anywhere on this planet, because everybody's a little selfish, right? I don't want to create an impossible standard, but the calibration is off with people who run for office. And I say this, I spend a lot of time with them. And then there's also the modern environment is so unforgiving for people who run for office, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I ran for office, I don't even know. I've done a lot of things right. I went to Yale Law School. I've started a bunch of organizations, yada, yada. But I also podcast every week and I say what I believe, including on this one. And I have been, I'm mostly single for my adult life, which means the Lord knows, right? So it's whatever,
which means you're going to get me too.
I've been a very respectful single person, but there's a lot of things that can happen in your world. And it's probably more likely to be something I said that I probably even believed that becomes some kind of spectacle. And people don't want to go through this. Right.
And put their families through it and you
don't even make a lot of money. You have to work. People don't realize this.
Unless you're insider trading.
Yeah, you're insider trading. But the amount of hours it takes to be a politician, in most jobs, if you were to put in an hourly wage, because you're basically nonstop, It's a crazy existence. And it's like being like, I'm obsessed with fame because like I think this next generation coming up is obsessed with fame. Now, being a politician is fame without the money, and I think fame is a restriction on your freedom. That's how I view it. It's like if I was famous, I couldn't do the things I've done the past few weeks in Costa Rica, go surfing, play tennis, sit at a coffee shop and read and write and all that, things I really love. Now,
You couldn't go to
yeah,
India
it
and
would be
be
a
a
hard time to be
reporter.
an Indian reporter, right? Now, there are great parts about being famous, like if you're going to be rich, right? If you care about those types of things, right? But if you could be rich and not famous, awesome.
That's the
But
best.
famous,
That's all the billionaires.
yes, but if you're famous and not rich, which is politics, worst thing in the world. So most sensible people don't look at that and say that's what I want, except for people who are obsessed with fame, and some cases obsessed with power as well. But it's like you have to really ascend in politics to get true power.
I was at this boondoggle that I can't really talk about, and I can't really talk about who was there, and I can't really talk about why I was there. But as
Exciting.
usual, found myself in a situation where you're like, how am I here and why? But I get to be this fly on the wall. And of course, I took the opportunity to go to all the like little, talks that they were having. It was in a ski town and a lot of private jets. And I was like, no one understands that all these people get together and ski. It was like all the multinational corporations, all the the funds.
Yep.
Certain right-wing pundits with lots of money, certain politicians' sons-in-laws, certain people in tech, and they're all just hanging out together. And then they'll go out and then they'll be like, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this is all. When my friends are like, how can you not be more, polarized? I'm like, don't you see they all ski together?
I had this conversation about Epstein, which is in our broken culture, everybody's looking for a partisan win when it comes to Epstein. They want to be like, oh, it was Clinton, by the way, who hasn't been president since I was in middle school.
Don't you see they're all pedos?
The Republicans want to point to Clinton, who hasn't been president in forever. And then the Democrats want to point to the Trump connections and the many Trump stuff. And look, those are real. Both of those things are real. But what people won't step back and say is, how is it that Noam Chomsky, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Bill Gates, freaking Stephen Hawking, David Copperfield, like you can go on, all these people were associated with him, many of them after it was known that this guy was a creep.
I was covering this on Dumpster Fire.
And what they want us to do is to be at each other's throats. They want us to be like, don't you see it's Trump? Don't you see it's Clinton? Because
don't you see they're all friends?
Yeah, everybody's friends. And they will scratch each other's backs and look out for each other whenever possible. In that same interview with Bethany McLean, she wrote this book about the pandemic, and half of the book is about the hot button issues, the masks, the mandates, the vaccines, the shutdowns, and all that. And we did spend some time talking on that, but I wanted to spend most of our time about how broken our healthcare system is outside of the pandemic, and why the pandemic was as deadly as it was outside of all these other things that people did that we can debate. And there was definitely a lot of nonsense happening. But my theory was the people who have created this broken system want us fighting about all that other stuff. They don't want us talking about how these hospital corporations often have a monopoly on your town, and why prescription drug prices are so expensive, why insurance is such a mess, why even if you have good insurance in this country, it's really hard to get great health care, how you get ripped off on a daily basis within the system, how if you grow up in a poor neighborhood, there are way fewer hospital beds than you live in a rich neighborhood, despite the fact that we spend ungodly sums of money on healthcare. They don't want us talking about any of that stuff. They don't want to talk about the fact that our supply chain in this country has been decimated and we don't manufacture basic things. Like a debate about masks is only relevant if we can make them, right? Like let's pretend they really work the way that the most sort of sweeping claims said they would. It doesn't matter in a world you can't make them. So they don't want us to talk about any of that stuff. They want to killing each other over like important questions, but questions that are going to be less relevant tomorrow than they were yesterday.
That's like that's like when you look at the list of people who have kind of become 100 millionaires while they're in Congress, it's bipartisan. Like no one wants to like check that. How are these public servants 100 millionaires?
Well, a good example is HCA, right? HCA is the largest hospital corporation in America. And what they do is they create mini monopolies over the hospital systems that they have in certain affluent type neighborhoods. And then they drive up costs and prices so that if you go to the hospital and they use a cotton swab for your whatever, they're going to charge you $250 for that cotton swab.
Right.
Now, what does HCA have? Well, HCA, in addition to having a lot of political connections, has their very own U.S. Senator in Rick Scott, who was the CEO of HCA, who somehow survived a federal indictment over their practices. Not him personally, but HCA executives while he was there. And previous to Rick Scott, they had Bill Frist, who's his own father started HCA, and Bill Frist was the Senate Majority Leader. So it's like just in the matter of 2 generations, they've had 2 very powerful U.S. senators. There are only 100 senators, and this corporation has had 2 of the most powerful senators. One who was the head of the Republican Senatorial Campaign Committee, in Rick Scott, and the other who was the Senate Majority Leader. One company had those.
Right.
So it's just like, that's crazy. And I'm probably missing a ton of other HCA board, members of the board and shareholders.
Have you talked to Andy Schoonover? He started Crowd Health. He comes from healthcare. He'll be on the podcast soon. It's really interesting what he's doing because he comes from the healthcare industry and he sees how broken it is. And he's a kind of a like libertarian trying to think outside of the box, and you pay into the system. And it's basically like the people will fund they've helped cancer patients. They've helped people with broken legs. It's like essentially the crowd, you will go and say, I have X that I need. They've helped with like maternal stuff. It's fascinating. I'm curious to know how it's going into, because I don't know how to, it seems so broken. The whole
needs
thing
a full scale it needs to be kind of redone, in my opinion, but there's no political will to do it. There are too many winners in the system right now that aren't us, that aren't the average person. Yeah. And the problem is,
that's my ongoing joke. Capitalism always wins, and we're the losers.
Well, what's crazy about healthcare is somehow we spend more than any other country, right? And our outcomes aren't better. In some cases, they're worse if you compare us to other sort of developed countries. But every step of the process, whether you're a Medicaid patient or you're somebody with really good insurance like I have, the system is really screwed up. Like I did a scan the other day that showed something on my pancreas. So I'm like, oh my God, I got to get this scanned. So I get referred to a specialist, and I go to see that specialist, and they basically are like, it's not a big deal, but we'll get you in again for a year. Then they send me a bill for that specialist treatment that's like super expensive. And then I call the other people who referred it, and I'm like, why am I getting a bill for this? These people are saying, and I talked to my insurance company, they say they didn't cover it. And I'm like, how is it possible you don't cover pancreatic cancer? Is a death sentence. How is it possible that you don't cover this specialty treatment? I never use anything. I'm like the type of person, I've been relatively healthy, knock on wood, thank God. Somehow you're not covering, I have like the platinum or whatever healthcare plan. Somehow you refer this, your doctor in network refers this. They don't catch that this is outer network. They send me to somebody, which is the kind of conversation you should want me having, because I will die if we get it wrong. And now you're saying you don't cover it. But even getting an answer to that question took me like 4 hours. And then, and then the answer was no.
Insane.
And that's with good healthcare in this country.
I know.
It's totally nuts. You know?
But it's almost better to have no healthcare or be on like a state-funded healthcare and be poor, because
regular Medicare is what I understand is the best if you have
I
regular Medicare, not Medicare Advantage, but regular Medicare.
I paid for good healthcare in California and then moved here, and you can't get individual PPOs. So I was put into the HMO system, which I've
That's
never
a whole other
had.
mess, right? Like
Holy shit! Like,
trying to get off cycle
was-
healthcare. I once had to buy catastrophic because I left a
it was
salary job
really
mid-year,
upsetting.
and I did Cobra, and then I think I missed a month, right? Whereas like I missed the deadline. I wasn't paying attention to the deadline. And I was off Cobra, and then I just like frantically was like, oh my God, I'm off healthcare. I went to go sign up for healthcare. They would not let me in the state of New York sign up for catastrophic healthcare or any other healthcare. I had to wait till the next enrollment period. And I'm like, how is this the policy? So I had to go use an Alabama address because my dad was living in Alabama at the time to buy catastrophic healthcare insurance from Alabama because they allow it and New York doesn't allow it. That's how I got healthcare that year. So crazy.
That's insane.
So crazy.
No, it's so crazy. It is even like around the mental health stuff. Like now that so much of the stuff has gone virtual because of all, and like don't even get me started on occupational licensing and all of that money grab and the restrictions there. How it's just bananas. I mean, yeah, these are the conversations I wish we were like. There should be no
licensing
national level.
I mean, if you're a doctor, you're building bridges or whatever, like licenses for those people, please. A pilot, but you're cutting hair, you're selling real estate. Come on, like
the market will take care of it,
right?
I mean, if you're a bad haired person, you're not going to get more clients. You'll get bad reviews. If my husband is a therapist, licensed marriage and family therapist, and I feel like if you're licensed in, California or New York or Texas, even where they have very stringent requirements and the most amount of hours, you should probably be allowed to treat people in Tennessee where they require 1,000 hours of, it seems like there should be some reciprocity here.
Yeah. Well,
they're working on it, I think.
It depends on the state. Medicine has gotten slightly better where they have this sort of, I forget what the term is, but my dad is a part of it. There's like a sort of reciprocal licensing system.
Yeah, it's like reciprocity. Massachusetts is really good on this, actually.
The law does the same, but you still have to pay all these damn fees, which is what this is really about. The state wants, they want your money. So,
what's your biggest? I could talk to you for many more hours, but what's your biggest defect of character?
Me? Oh, I think it's changed over the years. I think I was stubborn. I've done a lot of shrooms. I think that I've ironed out some of these things. But I did.
This is why you love Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, I order my shrooms from Colorado. They're for some reason they're able to mail them to me.
Okay, maybe you're not a fed.
Yeah. I would say up until recently, it was a certain comfort with combativeness. Like, so when I was and this is, I think, because of my upbringing in New York, is that I come from a family and in a neighborhood where everybody's just arguing all the time and really slightly dysfunctional family environment where just people are yelling at each other all the time, that I think I've grown to enjoy fights in general. I like debates. I like actual fights. And professionally in various places, like when I was in Tennessee, I would get, I'd be in a fight with a school board member and I would just immediately escalate it. And while other people would be horrified, it's my comfort zone.
Interesting.
And I think I've ironed out that mostly. I would say right now, I fought through a period of indifference over the past few years where I think in the process of ironing all that other stuff out, it was almost like too much passion, I became dispassionate. And I was almost too kind of like, oh yeah, whatever, everything's cool. And I lacked a certain fire. And so now what I'm trying to do is like balance those two, like maintain the enthusiasm, the fire, the passion without being like a combative person or, somebody who fosters unnecessary conflict, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I guess that really does go back to like, how do we use our voices and platforms to de-escalate what you see as an increasing tension and potential for political violence in the upcoming year.
Yes.
Even though, I'd like to pivot to like mommy blogging and bread making, I find myself in a position where I would like to try and stay focused and hopeful on some of the more things that are applicable to people, like what we were just talking about, healthcare and occupational licensing, and so many of the topics we just danced on. But
it's hard to be informed. Like being informed is a weight on your shoulders. Like when I go to the Wall Street Journal, we do it for a living, so it's a little bit easier to justify. But the average person, they're like, okay, am I going to read a book of poetry today or a good piece of literature, or am I going to go to the Wall Street Journal or the Atlantic or whatever and read about some kids in the Middle East who lost their limbs, or the Ukrainian government losing another piece of territory, or some money grab, and they're like, well, I have no control over that. So why am I reading about it?
Yeah, no control.
And I understand it completely. And there's a book I want to write. I have one book I'm working on now, but after this book, I want to write a book that I'm I'm sort of informally calling Shrink the World, which will combine some of the stuff I was talking about with AI in your personal world with like just a philosophy on life, which is, I think it's okay to ignore a lot of those other things if your energy is going into healing the people around you, whether it's your family, your friends, or in the case of New York, like we had a city council race where in the closing days of this most recent city council race in South Brooklyn, they were debating their positions on Israel-Palestine as if they're the UN Security Council, right? But what was going on at the same time was a migrant crisis in New York that was affecting the very neighborhood that they're talking about. Now,
aren't they like in schools today or something?
Yeah, they took over one of the schools, which we could talk about this forever, like this immigration mess. But regardless of what the solution is, the energy should be on that. That is what you control. Right. And this is a perfect example because there's so many broken politics of it. But one thing is for sure is that there are people who've shown up on our doorsteps, whether we think it was good policy or not, who, if you were in their position, you would have gotten to that doorstep too. I would have done what they did. And because of that, no matter what eventually happens, if you have energy, is it better to get that really pithy post about like Israel, Palestine and or whatever, or is it good to walk down the street and volunteer to like talk to some kid if you speak Spanish who arrived from another country, or
you just described what not anyone's going to do.
But you know what I'm saying is like,
no, like, I get it.
These are same people. These are human beings. It's like we can have all the different,
of course.
Like, and it doesn't even have to be that issue, right? Like I lived down the street from the Bowery Mission for many years. And as all of this stuff goes on, these protests, racial justice, yada, yada, the reality changed zero for the people at that mission. So I'm like,
right,
what are people doing? And I started this group called Second Chance Studios at that time, which helps people who come out of the prison system get jobs in digital media. And it's amazing to me, all these people who are showing up to those protests who didn't lift a finger to help that effort, right? It's like, so my feeling is it's okay to shrink your world if you're putting your energy into helping people, right? Like just being worldly literate, like, me knowing what's happened in the Syrian civil war is a great party trick, but is it really going to help anybody right now? Well, maybe.
Syrian civil war gets really ignored. So
yeah, well, that's the thing is like, that's a whole other thing, right? Like why we choose some conflicts. Like there were way more people killed during that. There are actually more people killed in the past decade in the Syrian civil war than in the entirety of the Israel-Palestinian conflict since the inception of the state of Israel. So, but nobody's talking about that, right?
No one cares about that. Yeah, no. It's the current thingism problem is very real. You follow that like current thing. And then I feel this has been something I've been trying to balance myself is because I've waited into by the end of last year having a kid, it's very, how do I balance like that? Does this affect me? But also this is the industry we're in.
Yeah.
Is this even the industry? I was like, I did a podcast with my husband where we do a podcast together and we never published it because I ended up just crying about this
I
whole
think people would
global
appreciate that.
situation. And I was like, I don't want to do this
I think
anymore.
people appreciate that, though. But that's why I think self-help is such a powerful genre, is because people can relate to it. They're like, I listen to this thing and it tells me how to be a better husband, a better father, a better mother, a better person. It gives me something. Whereas, like, I did 4-part series on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, and I'm very proud of it. I'm not sure what anybody listening to that could do about it, right? We're all more informed,
Yeah.
and I really enjoy doing it. And I worked at the UN. I've been to Israel many times in the Palestinian territories, but I don't think I'll ever be called upon to work on that issue ever again. So the question is, like, what are we all doing? I've asked myself this a lot, and I think, and the interesting thing is, it dovetails with the AI personal questions, which is, this is not what I'm doing, but let's say I became a welder, which apparently is very popular now. Well, that's like a thing that's right in front of your face. Like,
Yeah.
that actually is, in many ways, it's like the Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance type of
Yeah.
approach. It's like, there's something calming about, hey, this person's motorcycle broke down, I'm going to fix it. That's,
Yeah. I wish I knew it. I mean, I definitely, looking back, I would have become like an electrician or something.
Yeah.
I wish I knew more trade skills, and it's that's like been one of my words for this year is competent.
Yes.
I want to be more competent.
It's not too late, though.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
I mean, I taught myself how to make bread. I want to get into gardening with my daughter, and there's so many skills that I can learn. I feel very grateful to be able to do what I'm doing, and I love having these conversations, and they stimulate me, and it has been an education for me, who only went to part of a community college. And it has been, I love Dumpster Fire because I think it gives a lot of people relief, and they feel like, fine, I'm not alone, feeling like everyone's lost their freaking mind, even if I get things wrong all the time. And it's how I make my living, but I don't want it to be, I want to be in the world. I look at, like, my daughter's obsessed with the universe. She's little and she can name all the planets. She points out Jupiter. And the more you learn about it, the more you're like, this is also fleet. We're here for like a fraction of a second, and I'm fucking doom scrolling. I want to kill myself.
Yeah.
It's just,
this is where the shrooms help. I had a conversation with a tree the other day about this. But what you do well, and I think cuts beyond this, is, and the reason why doing the kind of work that you're doing is not mutually exclusive with shrinking your world, is you have to have a relationship with your audience, which you clearly do. And as long as you have a relationship,
I love my audience.
as long as you have a relationship with your audience and you think about your audience and you respect your audience, and I think this is the problem with so many of these shows, is they manipulate their audience, they disrespect their audience. And sometimes they do it without realizing it because they're manipulating themselves. They hide facts. They refuse to admit their mistakes. They feel like they've got to take a position. They're doing something other than serving the audience itself. And they're also, and you and I have talked about this before, they're too afraid to disappoint their audience. Whereas I think, like, you have to build an audience that you're very comfortable disappointing, not because you want to give them a bad service, but because you want to be honest with them. But you do all this well, and it's like I think it was Seth Godin or somebody said is like 100 true fans or 1,000 true fans. I've always thought about it like that. It's like people are so, like, numbers crazy now. They're like, if I don't have Mr. Beast style numbers, but I'm like, well, before the advent of all these tools, if you walked into an auditorium of a few hundred people, that would be the biggest audience you spoke to that year.
It's big.
So if you've got a few dozen people in your audience, a few hundred, a few thousand, if you're lucky, and by the way, you start going up these numbers, you got a few thousand people, you're probably in the top 10% of all podcasts, right? So you are speaking to a huge audience. If you get to 10,000, that's like a stadium of people watching a hockey game, right? So you start to go through these numbers, right? And, like, majority 54 in your show, you get to hundreds of thousands, and you're talking about bigger numbers than anybody ever spoke to anybody before the advent of these technologies. And if you respect that audience, then, and you really try to create a relationship with them, then it is shrinking the world. Because then if you're talking about anything, if you're talking about the Syrian civil war, you're not really talking about the Syrian civil war, you're talking about the audience, right? And you're trying to create a sense of ethics for the audience that hopefully applies beyond what that one conflict is. I think that's true of the Israel-Palestinian conflict, which is this sort of anti-colonial oppressor mentality stuff that was showing up in that debate. I thought was relevant to domestic debates and the way that I was interacting with people in my life. And so I was like, all right, this is a good opportunity to unpack something that is relevant at home. That makes any sense.
Yep. No, that does. I mean, there's a piece that I've been talking about. I've wanted to write forever after being in South Africa. We had the ability to travel with these conservationists, but they were the guys working with some of the parks training the rangers to an anti-poacher methodology, because basically this rhino war came to them and they were completely unprepared for it. It's like an actual war. And they were just not trained, didn't have the right shoes, so we were there and it was fascinating. I got to talk to the head of the park. I got to talk to the helicopter guys. I got to talk to the guys on the ground, and everyone's different perspective. And there was this idea of like the noble poacher and, oh, they're just trying to feed their family. But then the local guys were like, fuck that. They're all drug addicts and like they just want girls and they hang out in clubs and they're just like selfish. It was so eye-opening. And of course, China's, involved. And it's like, I feel like the problem, and I've said this many times, and I think Israel-Palestine is another thing you kind of map on this, where it's like the problem with the rhino is like the problem with everything.
Yeah.
There's so many different competing factors, poverty, lack of access. It was, and so many different perspectives. I don't actually know how you would even begin to solve that problem, because it starts with this demand for rhino horn. How do you even, you can't eradicate that.
There's an incredible book out there called How to Be Perfect by Mike Schur. Mike Schur from the Good Place and all that.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible book. He basically distills down ethics into a book. In the name is a joke, right? Like he doesn't actually mean anybody's going to be perfect, but he kind of distills down ethical philosophy into this manual. It's essentially how to be a good person. And he starts the book by presenting like a very pedestrian concern, which is whether to return your shopping cart at the supermarket. And he's like, of course.
This is like always a debate on Twitter.
Well, he's like, yeah, of course you return it. But then he's like, wait a minute, there's a person whose job it is. And now if I return my shopping cart, does that mean that they won't hire more people to return the shopping? And he's like, goes through this whole thing. And it's like, and what he kind of dusts it off is like, the book kind of comes down to some very basic precepts, which is be kind, try. Like this is if you're trying, you are way ahead of everybody. Like if you're just trying to be a good person, and if you make bad decisions, you don't create an ethics around those bad decisions. Meaning, like I have been a lapsed vegetarian for a long time, but I don't pretend that I still don't think that factory farms are evil and horrible, and that I'm doing the wrong thing. I think what happens is people, they lapse and then they're like, well, factory farms aren't a big deal. Let me tell you what, but it's like, no. Like the key is do the best you can, be a nice person, try to do the best. And when your actions are out of step with the ethics, don't change the ethics, focus on the action. And I think if you get that stuff right, then you're way ahead, right? Like that to me is as simple as it gets. And yes, the questions are impossible at times, right? Which is, do I get an electric car? Well, now I'm hearing that the batteries are being mined in some country and that it's like, whatever, like just do the best you can, right? Like, like just try to be as well-researched and as thoughtful as you can be. And most of the time it's just like how you interact with the people around you that's going to make the biggest impact in the world,
What's your biggest asset?
My biggest asset.
What did the tree tell you, Ravi?
It's funny. This is gonna make me sound like a total loon, but the very thing that that I haven't mentioned.
I've talked to trees on
that I didn't want to do.
I get it.
The very thing that I haven't said yet on this pod, but I will once I'm able to tell the world that I want to do. I was asking the tree for permission to do it, and it essentially said, "You can do it, but you have to do this other thing in return." And that was the interesting conversation, which obviously the trees is somewhere in my head, which is interesting. My biggest asset, I would say, is I think I was just blessed with like the ability to learn things really, really fast. And uh, I have been a lifelong learner, and I will be for the rest of my life. And maybe it's the combination. They say like curiosity is worth 15 IQ points. There are definitely people around me who are, especially when I got to places like Yale Law School, like who are infinitely smarter than I am. But it's rare that I find somebody who's more curious than I am. And I think that curiosity makes life wonderful, but also makes it easy to learn new things because it's rare that I have to push myself to get excited about something, no matter what it is, whether it's, you know, chemistry, biology, or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't know. Like it's my parents are like that too. Like my mom went back, she's a nurse, and after we all left, she went back and got her history degree and now teaches history at the local college. Uh, and my dad is, he's always doing things like running for office and stuff, even though he's a doctor. So it's like, that's, I think I'm blessed with. And actually, when I was doing these rooms most recently in Costa Rica, I was just reflecting on that, which is the world is not dull, and
No.
I'm trying to be more curious about the people around me. Cause I think I'm curious about ideas and things like that. But I think sometimes people disappoint me and I need to be more forgiving because I will retreat to books and learning and things like that and activities. And this is part of what the tree was telling me I had to do is like, I have to be more kind to the people around me. It's not that I'm mean to people, but it's more like curious, the kindness of curiosity to learn about people who are around me because I haven't been doing enough of that lately.
Is the like single forever a choice? Is that a lifestyle choice, or is that just you haven't met the one, or are you like a poly guy, like the tech bros?
I have been in serious relationships before, and I'm in one right now. I think I'm like a fiercely independent person,
Yeah.
and I'm also very happy being on my own. So it's a constant struggle, like even including in the relationship I'm in right now, which is, we're constantly just having conversations about it, and it's also a long distance relationships, which makes it really hard. Um, but yeah, and you're married, right? So like, but you seem like an independent person.
But I was I got married at how old was I? God, 41. I mean, I got married very young at 23 to a Belarusian, and then we got divorced after 5
I love
years.
that the nationality. The Belarusian. I have so many questions.
So many questions. And you can ask me on your podcast. And he actually recently passed away, which is very sad. I'll sound like a loon too. I was on this like ashram / it ended up being kind of a sex cult, but it was like a place in Australia, and the guru there did my runes, and he said that my like life's mission was to figure out how to balance love and freedom.
Yes.
Because I saw love as an impingement to my freedom.
Yeah.
And I'd been single.
That.
I was like proudly single forever. And I used to joke that I wanted to I have this picture of me jumping in front of like a sunset that brought me to tears in Sri Lanka. It was so stunningly gorgeous. And it was just me. And I wanted to make it my Christmas card and be like, I'm the freest person on this wall. Cause you see all the families with the sweaters. And now I'm a Texas suburban mom, which had you told, and I joke about this on stage. I'm like, if you told me this would be the like trajectory, I would have probably never quit drinking. But I feel more grounded and fulfilled than ever. And motherhood is like the craziest trip and has given me so much. And my relationship has given me so much freedom. And I feel like it's almost a superpower having this kind of grounded love at home when I go out into the world and take these risks and put myself out there. Like, I don't care because I have everything. My whole heart is here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that has been really wild.
I mean, and I'm so happy to hear that. I think the key is for people to just not judge each other, right? I think a lot of my friends with families judge the single people in their world, and my single friends judge the families. I'm staying with a bunch of families right now, and I think the key is just to look at people and say there are different kinds of people, and different people want different things. There are also different phases of life, as you described, and then there's also there's there's a place for everybody. Like, I think it's important to have people who are really good at parenting and family, and then there's like probably a space for people who are fiercely independent and all that, and it's what makes the world really interesting. And everybody's different. Like, I happen to be on a spectrum, I think, which is like on the more independent side of things than most. Um, and it makes it harder. And it's always just a question of like, to me, it's just a matter of like my baseline is. I love my baseline, which is like, if I sat in this office I'm sitting in today and I did this, and then I did another podcast, and I like wrote a bit, and I went surfing and did tennis, all that. Like, my baseline is just really happy.
The single life.
I know, it's like my baseline is really happy, so the bar is very high, and that doesn't mean that
I
you
think
clear
of
the
the
bar.
time I squandered.
No,
Oh, God.
But it's like, but you don't want to be a dilettante either. Like, you want to give back to this world, and I think like my and this is part of what the tree was telling me is like the key is, if you're gonna go my path, you've now decided that you're, at least in the short term, you're not giving back to the next generation the way that a lot of other people do. So then how are you giving back? Now, I had been a school principal for about a decade, so I at least have that to say of investing in the next generation. But I do think that whatever I do with this freedom, if I continue to exercise it, at least according to my ethics, people could just be self-interested and all that. That's totally fine. To my ethics, I have a high bar to clear. Like, I should be giving back to society because I think it's important.
Yeah, I love that. We'll end on that.
Yes.
This has been awesome conversation. I just really appreciate your perspective and your voice in the world. And we should keep in touch and talk more often.
Yes, and people out there, go to the Lost Debate Show, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to join Squadra, you can go to joinsquadra.com. Love it. And you can find me on Instagram at Ravi M. Gupta. Right now, surfing, playing tennis. So you can see all that and get mad at me. You could throw shade my way.
No, we'll live vicariously through you as you talk to trees and play tennis.
Oh, God.
I feel lucky because I actually feel like I got to do that and now I get to do this. Like, I feel very lucky. I got to really live. I kind of slid under the catcher and was the last minute. I got the last kid out of the train station or whatever, just like a miracle child. But my husband and I had come to terms with we're like, we'll help our aging parents. We'll be the people who take the kids when our siblings need a break. Like, we were totally fine with that, and travel and have money.
Yep. Well,
So
I can't wait to see y'all when I go to Austin next.
Definitely.
Love Austin.
Yeah. I love it. We're in the burbs, but we'll definitely see you. So thank you so much.
Hold on to your jingle bells. Pluto TV has all your holiday favorites for free. Enjoy our season's greetings category with 9 holiday channels, including holiday movie favorites by Lifetime, Festive Fireplace, Holiday Lights, and Hallmark movies and more. Download the Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming holiday favorites on live channels and on demand. With thousands of free movies and TV shows, Pluto TV is your home for the holidays. Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
It's time for the weekly check-in with Bridget and cousin Maggie.
Check-in.
Maggie is moving out.
That's right. That's the big news. I'm like, what's going on?
You can never argue with a heart attack. You ought to know by now.
This check-in's just going to be Bridget singing.
Who needs a house out in Hackensack? Is that all you get for your money? I'm moving out.
Yep. I'm moving out. got my own place and everything.
It's exciting.
It's very exciting.
It's very cute too.
It is. I actually spoke with one of the women who's helping me with the lease and stuff like that. And she was like, oh, I live in the same apartment layout. She was like, I love it.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Are you going to get your lease?
Yeah, I got it. I talked to them. They were having issues with their system yesterday or something like that. So now it's 40 pages long and I need to read it.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh my God, my last lease at our last place was 1 page.
Yeah. Send it to Pops.
Yeah.
Have a lawyer look that over.
Like it's just a lot of like addendums. So it's like, you know, they put the here's how the water works. And then they give you like the city's water agreement, which is like 4 pages. You know, it's like all this stuff.
It feels like, yeah, it's weird. Texas is weird like that. It seems like a lot more paperwork and stuff, even though there's less regulation. I'm not sure what that.
They just give you all the paperwork to sign to be like, okay, you're on the hook for this now.
It's a very strange state. It's a very strange place we live in. And we'll probably secede from the United States any minute now.
Any day. I know it's still weird to be like, oh, I live in Texas and now I'm getting my own place.
Yeah. You're not fully committed like we are. You can still bounce.
I can still bounce out.
When the Civil War comes.
Well, where am I going to go?
I was joking that there might not be, you know, I always joke about the like America's too fat for a civil war, but it is interesting the border stuff where the, you know, Texas Border Patrol or whatever, what are they called? The Texas, I should know this. It's not the border, it's the Border Patrol versus the Texas National Guard.
Oh.
So where the Texas, because the Supreme Court was basically like, you've got to take the razor wire down if the Border Patrol, if the federal government is saying take it down. And the Texas National Guard is like, F you. And even today they were like defying orders. And I'm like, this is an area where you start to like wander into maybe there could be a civil war. Because you have 2 armed forces at odds with one another. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm like, okay, this is an area where I'm like, maybe there will be a civil war.
Texas just puts up a razor wire around its entire state.
Yeah, but that's the interesting thing. That's where civil war actually makes sense. I'm like, okay, this is the government against, you know, an armed state government, basically. And that is where you're saying like, what would a civil war be over when you think of it in terms of like the culture war stuff? You're like, well, and then you have freaking Tucker online and he's like, where are the Texas men? I'm like, you listen up, loafers. Where are you?
I know. I know.
You wear a fucking bow tie and you're like trying to goad these plebs into fighting your dirty work. How many politicians and pundits will just basically dare poor people to fight their fights for them?
This is the thing that drives me crazy about preppy men. And like, it's so funny because in college, my boyfriend at the time was this like kind of blue collar dude from Queens. And he was at this kind of elite preppy school
where I think Tucker Carlson actually went, didn't he?
No, we went to the same high school. I'm talking about college.
Oh, but yeah, same trajectory,
but same people. And my boyfriend did not understand like the bar dudes and like preppy dudes talk shit. And my boyfriend would be like, okay, you want to say that to me? Like, let's fucking step outside.
Yeah.
And I was like, they're never going to fight you. I was like, they don't do that. No. I was like, they just talk shit. They run their mouths, but they're never going to like, he could not understand that. He was like, I will beat your ass. It was such a weird cultural like dissonance. He did not understand at all. And I was like, wow, this is a really weird thing to like see, because I was like,
yeah, you're preppy.
Yeah. And I was like, oh no, they're never gonna like step outside and like back up their shit talk with action. No. Absolutely not.
No. They don't want to get their pretty hair
and
scuffed.
If they did get their freaking face pounded in, they'd call daddy and have you kicked out.
Exactly.
You know?
Listen up, loafers, with your bow tie. Stop trying to. Why don't you get down here to Texas and defend the border or whatever? It just makes me crazy.
That's the best nickname for him. Did you just come up with that, or is that something that's online?
I just always think of him as having loafers. I'm sure it's online too. I can't be the only one who notices this.
He is totally the guy who always wears loafers.
He's always in loafers.
Yeah, boat shoes.
When I saw him live, he was wearing loafers, and it was one of the first things I thought, like, oh, you dress like every yuppie dude that I know. And now he's like, where are the Texas men? Like, I don't know. Where are you, bro? Why don't you come down here and fight the federal government like a real man? It's good to see even Texas men are pushing back and like, shut up. They're like, shut up. Like this whole, sitting in a freaking air conditioned studio that I've been saying for, I think the best thing that could happen from the season 2 that the Babylon Bee was like, despite horrible reviews, season 2 of Trump Biden has been renewed. And I'm like, it is like a bad show that you're like, why did they cancel all of these other good shows and this is getting renewed? And I do think maybe the best thing that could happen is the utter disdain people have for all of it. It does seem to be breaking the culture wars a little bit. There's, from my sense on the ground, people are very much like, all of you suck.
Right.
You all.
That's good. Can we all agree on
suck.
that?
Like, you're all just trying to get rich and powerful, having us go fight your wars for you and using us to divide against each other. And I mean, the border thing is out of control.
Yeah.
And that's a sketchy situation down there.
Yeah.
I guess those migrant caravans did finally appear. I just keep thinking of Kamala being like, do not come. Do not come. And they literally all came. Like, did they hear that as please come? All of them came. All of them.
It's such a weird, I look back on dumpster fire, just the old dumpster fires. I'm like, remember when we had to watch a video about how to pronounce Kamala's name?
I look back on, I've been watching the old dumpster fires, taking notes, and even the old walk-ins welcomes, these conversations that are finally going mainstream somewhat. I always think dumpster fire is too far behind the news cycle, and now I'm starting to think it's like too many years ahead of it. Sometimes even ahead of me, where I'm like, oh, this is just a conspiracy theory. And now I'm like, Sam, what will be the news in 4 years? Please tell me. And it's very a strange and unsettling time to, be raising a child. And I do try to just stay focused on that which I can control. And I do want to, I said it on the newsletter this week. I just want to plant a garden and worry about it. Neither one of these dudes might be alive come election.
Right.
Or definitely like, I don't know how long they're going to be able to pretend that Biden is capable.
I don't know either.
How much methamphetamine? That's why we have the border crisis, because we need that much methamphetamine to power our president. We need an endless supply of methamphetamine to keep Weekend at Biden's going. This is my new conspiracy theory.
I like it.
It's just a very funny time. I don't know. Maybe I'm just becoming more realistic about things. Like I had Catherine Brodsky came back on, and she's very much kind of in the center, trying to get people to talk. And I'm in the same place. I think I'm maybe more nihilist. I'm not sure if I'm more nihilistic or if I'm just more realistic about, because it was an interesting conversation. It was like devil advocating myself of 5 years ago. Where I might just be a little bit further. And again, having a child radicalized me. where it's like, yeah, well, I don't want that gender shit anywhere near my kid. So keep it out of the schools. But I've heard you really can't. And by the way, what is up with math?
I don't know.
Why did they change math?
I don't know.
And no one talked about it.
And a lot of people talked about
but
it.
But no one pushed back against it. No one said, hey, math worked this way.
Parents were all like up in arms and outraged about it. They were like, why can't I help my kid with their math homework anymore? This makes no sense.
No, it makes no sense. We have a mutual friend who's teaching in the education system, and she's like doing some substitute teaching, and she's in 5th grade. She's like, the math is insane. Why did they just decide to change it?
I don't know. There must have been some sort of like money push or something behind it.
I'm going to have to go down this route. If anyone out there is a teacher, I know we have some teachers in our community and listeners, and apologies to how much shit I give teachers. It's really the unions I have an issue with. Please explain or direct us to the long read about why they changed math. It seems bonkers.
Yeah.
This is why Americans are stupid.
Yeah.
You can't just change math.
I know.
They're teaching them all this gender stuff and this weird version of math that makes no sense. This is some Chinese propaganda.
This is some commie nonsense.
Maybe I will. I'm going to go down to the border.
Tune in next week for another riveting episode that will change your life, help you get out of your own way, and solve all the world's problems. I want to thank our composer, Jared Elias, my co-producer and cousin, Maggie, and all of you out there listening. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.